Hello, my name is Matt Solomon. I'm the Vice President of Business Development with ID Agent, part of the Kaseya company. And I'm delighted to welcome my friend and partner, Kyle Wentworth of Wentworth Consulting Group. He's got a new technology platform that he's going to be talking to us about today. It actually helps both the MSP and the MSP customer on the small business, mid-sized organization side of things. And Kyle, we're delighted to have you here today.
Matt, thanks very much for the time today.
Absolutely. So Kyle, you're kind of reintroducing yourself into the MSP space because you're certainly not a stranger to it. Maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about your background in the MSP space because it's quite vast.
So I've been in the IT industry for the last 43 years. And yeah, it's a long time, since 1976, actually coming up on August 10th, it'll be the anniversary.
Wow.
And starting in 1991, I opened a consulting firm as a break-fix organization called Consultations Plus, and transitioned that organization in 2007 into an MSP space. Prior to that, we were dealing with just break-fix work. So new servers, new firewalls, handling customer calls, everything was per hour, and there really wasn't a planned service agreement. Introducing into the managed services program in 2007, Consultations Plus transitioned with a purchase of another IT company in Grand Rapids, Michigan called Service Technology, and we created Fusion IT. And from 2007 until the end of June of last year, I was president. I was the founder of that entity with a couple other partners in it that I eventually sold that business to. So that company is still running up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They're a wonderful managed services, Christian-based company that services companies all throughout the country. Those 29 years now of managed services platform background gives me a great perspective into understanding who an MSP is supposed to be, who a managed security service practice is supposed to be, what types of tools that they provide, how those tools are supposed to be implemented, and what type of customers benefit from those tools.
Yeah, I guess, from that experience, can you talk a little bit about the struggles that you found? I mean, your own MSP, what were you facing with clients? What are common, issues that you had serving your clients as an MSP?
So one of the most prominent issues that we noticed with clients was a lack of an IT educated executive person on staff at that client to understand the verbiage, the dialogue, the quote structures, the products inside of the solutions that were being provided by the MSP. So what we had is a product that was being presented to the client that was valid for that client's network, but no one at that client to really understand what it was that we were providing. So there was always an education issue where somebody who was that built widgets for a living or serviced other companies in the food industry, or their job really wasn't IT, they didn't have somebody in that organization that understood really what those quotes were.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem was, you would get this quote, you would leave the meeting, you'd present this quote, you'd leave the meeting, and then the client would take their staff, they would put it all together in a room, and they would continue talking about this quote. And then they would go back for sometimes days or weeks or months and review that quote, get other people to present their quote, to do competitive analysis to see if what their MSP was telling them was actually what they wanted, because they really didn't understand, so they had to get somebody else's education. And excessive, arduous hours and time and resources were spent trying to evaluate this quote. When realistically, by the time that they were done with the additional quotes that they received from other companies, there might be a $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 difference, sometimes a $10,000 difference in a $100,000 quote. And to the customer, $10,000 is a big deal. But how much time and effort and energy and money did they lose from all of the resources that they had to spend trying to find that $10,000 difference? When realistically, if they had had a trained individual on site at that location that was on their staff who understood that quote before the quote came to the door, they would have been able to evaluate immediately whether or not that quote was valid. So not having someone educated, IT educated in that client space actually cost them a lot more money through time and resources and effort and energy and stress to evaluate what those solutions were.
Right.
So what we understood was that it would have been a lot faster if we actually had somebody that was educated at that client to work with, close the sales gap, close that time to getting the solution put in place, and also reaping the benefit of having that new solution, new technology put in place at a much earlier point in time.
Yep.
It helps the IT process flow correctly. So that was the number one thing. Then, not having an educated person on staff, were you really positive that what you received from that client, from that MSP, was the product that they quoted?
Yep.
Who was there to validate the installation of that firewall? Who was there to validate that the security on the server was right? And that's another big deal. The client's relying 100% on that managed service provider. They don't have somebody internally who can say, yep, you did this, and yep, you did that. And yes, all of these things and pieces to that quote were completed correctly. Everything was valid.
Right.
Everything was done right. I'm happy with your service, appreciate it. So the only time that you really understand these things is if a competitor comes in and they run their tools against it and say, hey, do you realize all this stuff is not being done? And so it's a constant battle back and forth when it would be a lot easier if you just had somebody internally to run those processes to make sure that the internal IT was happening the way that the external IT company said it was supposed to. And that's kind of like the concept of, you know, I say if you went to a bakery and you ordered a chocolate cake and you took a bite of that chocolate cake, you can tell it's chocolate cake. You can tell it's yep. got chocolate frosting and that it tastes great. And yeah, you got a chocolate cake. But can you understand the same concept when you go to an IT company and say, I need a firewall in my business, and they offer you a UTM firewall with endpoint protection? Did you actually get that? And do you even understand what that means? Or how to evaluate it? Second thing is that there's no real dedicated IT budget. So everybody's paying for things as those solutions are presented by the MSP or as a new problem comes in, usually by a software upgrade that they got from their ERP company, and now they need new computers to run that software package. Or are they staying up to date with a budgeted process to make sure that their IT is part of the process? And if they don't place focus on IT as the most important non-human asset in the business, they end up constantly chasing their tail when it comes to IT expenses. So that's the third thing is IT a focused part of their business process? Which gets into, do they even have a business process? Do they understand what business process modeling is? Do they understand how business process modeling begats a worker process that eventually begats an automation process or an application process model, as we call it? Because the application process model creates the automation piece of how the business functions. And it eliminates all that distraction or all that duplication. It identifies all the things that can be automated and the things that must be manual. Currently, I can't drive up to a gas pump and have the gas pump put gas in my car. Right. I can't do it yet. It's probably coming, but I can't do it yet. So that's still a manual process. But I no longer have to talk to the teller at the counter in order to pay for my gas. That's an automated process.
Yep.
And it's even more automated than sliding my card into a slot. I can just wave my card over a little reader.
Yep.
but there's security issues related to that process. All of these things are part of a business process model, understanding what is automatable and what is manual. Once you define that, then you can define the software that needs to run your business and fulfill the worker processes effectively. So all of these parts are struggles that I saw within the MSP space. You'd walk into clients and they wouldn't know who they were. You had to help them define that. They didn't have a budget for managing who they were related to an automated process. And they had no one in-house to identify that when processes were put in place, they were done correctly.
Yeah, and that last piece, about documentation, it's I mean, that's such an area that so much wasted money if you don't have proper documentation. At Kaseya, we call that the space between, basically, because it's all that time you spend without documentation, wasting your time looking for things.
I have touted that for years. The documentation before implementation process is extremely important. When your business process model is put in place, it is solid rock. It takes a hammer and chisel to edit it.
Yep.
So your business process model must be followed to maintain efficiency. It doesn't mean that it can't change. You just need a process for changing your business process. That way, everybody does exactly the same thing, the same way, all the time, according to the business process, and efficiencies are put in place, and a loss of revenue is removed from people doing it the wrong way or doing it their own way.
Yep.
You don't want to eliminate creativity, but if you're in a manufacturing process and I have to put out 1,000 chairs, those 1,000 chairs need to look the same. The process that it takes to handle the client once they walk in the door or they call on the phone, to the point that that chair goes out to that client's location and gets installed, all of those pieces to that puzzle, some things are automated, some things are manual. Identifying them so that everyone is on the same sheet of music when every task needs to happen is critical to functional operation of the business.
Absolutely. And so you talked about a lot of the struggles, and I think that's really where Wentworth Consulting Group came from, right? It's all these struggles that you saw and not necessarily having the right business to solve that issue. And that's really where this started, right? I mean, is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. What I noticed after all of these years is that executives were wasting their time, be it the CEO, the CFO, the controller, a chief operations officer, some manager who was just placed in charge. Most commonly, it's the finance person or the controller that's put in charge of IT-related decisions. We see that most commonly. But that person, just because they have a background in finance, doesn't mean they have a background in technology. So I commonly sat in CFO's offices for extended hours teaching them IT, enough for them to be able to make logical decisions based on the quotes that we provided, and to keep them up to date with terminologies that we would use as we talked about the things that we implemented in their organization. And probably the biggest compliment I received from my clients when I retired from Fusion IT was how much, whether they liked it or not, their education in technology advanced just because of the dialogue that I kind of pushed along with them to make sure that they were educated in what we were doing for them. Education is a huge piece, but it's time consuming.
Yep.
And if I don't need to learn how to fix my car because I can hire a mechanic to fix my car, let the mechanic fix my car. Yep. However, if my air conditioner is not working in my car, did a fuse cause it? Did, I don't even know all the parts of the air conditioning unit. But if it was a different part of the air conditioning unit that failed, how do I know that what they repaired was actually what was wrong with my car, or what I got billed for was actually what was repaired? I have to trust that mechanic.
Right.
But it's until I take it to somebody who's another mechanic that works on air conditioning systems before I really understand that the job was done in my best interest at my best cost. That's why Wentworth Consulting Group is important, because we put the executives back to work doing the job that they want to do all day, their job. The CEO can be the CEO and build his business. The CFO can do finance. Doesn't have to spend till 10 o'clock at night at the office doing finance because he spent till 5 o'clock during the day dealing with IT problems.
Right.
So that's the primary condition that we solve. The primary struggle with the client that we solve is we get executives back to work. Now, what do we do going beyond that? We manage and improve the IT implementations and operations that happen in that business on a day-to-day basis. Not everything is needed day-to-day, but we manage that IT infrastructure and communicate with that managed service provider. We manage their MSP for them. We manage that relationship and communicate to the executives above when there is something that's necessary for them to deal with. But if they don't have to deal with the management of IT and they only see that, hey, this project's going to happen, it's happening this day and that day and this day, and these are the struggles that we're going to fix in the process. They get the shortest amount of information, IT continues to run, operate successfully, and the managed service provider gets to do their job efficiently. We also get to validate whether or not they're doing their job efficiently. And if they're not, and they need to be replaced, or they need to be educated or brought up to speed on how they need to do it better, we can do that because we have such a vast background in technology. The business process model and the worker process model and the application process model that we talked about just a little bit ago, those are all functions of businesses that if they aren't currently in place, we bring that to the table to allow the business to operate more functionally, effectively, and cost effectively without duplication of efforts and without a loss of time or an overuse of time by having multiple people who do the same job at 25% yield.
Yep.
If you can find inefficiencies in the business, people can be reutilized in other places and allow one person to do 75 to 80% as a goal of their day doing this one task. We did that with a client years ago by rewriting a financial software that they had because they did piece rate billing for all of their employees, piece rate payment and piece rate billing. And there really wasn't a software package out there to do piece rate financial processing. So we developed a software package, took 4 people that were doing finance 8 hours a day, 2 people who were doing it 4 hours a night, 2 nights a week to process payroll. We took that and moved it into one person processing payroll 1 hour a day, 5 days a week. Put all the other people back to work.
Wow.
They had a negative ROI when we turned the product on. Because
Really?
there was so much benefit from everybody going back to work and all the time cards were eliminated. We put it into an automated process.
Yep.
So that's what business process modeling does for a company. Having a good business process, a good worker process model, documented processes for each individual task in the company to follow through with, so that everybody knows how something is supposed to be done. That way, when Judy goes off to vacation, Betty can sit in her desk and do the exact job because the worker process is sitting right there for her to follow. The second person may not be trained in that position, but the worker process allows them to do it in an interim.
Yep. The
application process model gives them that movement towards automating as much as can be automated. And if you understand that IT runs your business and IT needs to be part of the process and you have a dedicated budget towards it, it helps your business to operate functionally, especially in a time like COVID. I can't tell you how many times we have heard of companies failing because they were not prepared for a time like today. And it was because their IT wasn't ready for it. And the cost of getting to that space in IT was too expensive for them. The budget wasn't there to do that task. And they ended up laying people off, and now the companies are closed. So IT is a critical piece. You and I both know that. If it's functioning correctly, you can do it anywhere. You can run it anywhere, and your business can continue to grow.
Yeah. Now, and you're coming into the, I mean, this is such a perfect time. It's because every company is having to reevaluate how they do business, and automation has to be part of it.
It has to be.
Yep. And so there's also not just, MSPs, I guess, in the traditional sense. There's lots of other companies that are doing things that I guess don't necessarily refer themselves as MSP as we commonly use the term. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So a traditional MSP handles the IT infrastructure, handles the network, handles software installation, day-to-day maintenance, operations of that IT. They handle what happens to make IT run in the business. They also should be doing monitoring of those systems and disaster recovery, backup, business continuity processes to make sure that if a disaster happens or if a failure happens, data can be recovered. You can reconnect to data in a new location. All those things are budgetary constraints, but the most important piece is to make sure that you can get your data back in the event that you have a disaster, or you can get connected to it quickly in the event that there's a problem. So that's what your traditional MSP is responsible for, the day-to-day functional operations of the business.
Yep.
How we're not traditional in that piece, we're still a managed service provider because we're providing a managed service on a monthly budgeted process for our client. But we're offering that chief technical officer, chief information officer, chief information security officer, and business process modeling management as a service. So that's how we're still an MSP. We're just not installing or selling technology solutions as a focus. We have some solutions like ID Agent as an example, that when customers don't have a solution that's searching the dark web for data to make sure that their network is secure, we can still offer those solutions independently. But our focus isn't necessarily to sell servers and firewalls and routers and switches. We want the MSP to manage that.
Got it.
We want the MSP to take care of that process. So it makes us very easy to budget because we do it based on an employee count basis, a recurring model employee count basis. And it's very easy to measure that result of how effectively we're doing business because of the amount of time that's reduced in executives not having to do our job.
Got it.
And it's much more cost effective. It's much more cost effective than hiring those 4 people individually. You're between $500,000 and $750,000 a year to get those 4 positions in your business.
Right.
So we take that expense and we revert it down into an easily manageable, perspective-based, monthly recurring service fee model that allows the company to afford the knowledge that's required at the proper amount of time that's needed to do those jobs. If you hired a CTO today and they came into your business and they worked in your business for 9 months, they would have a pretty good collection of IT necessities and needs and processes that were needed to run your business effectively with IT. And then their 80% use time that it took to do that for 9 months turns into 20 to 25, maybe 30% during the month afterwards, because IT is running itself. And now you only need to be part of functional change and operations in your business. So what do you do the rest of the time? You phone call with new vendors, you research new products, you do these kinds of keep you busy and play golf with those vendors and those people who are making those products. And that's really dead time that doesn't need to be an expense to the customer. So we help to reduce that into a monthly manageable cost, as well as help with that ROI that puts those executives right back to work.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think you're kind of going right into the next area, and I think probably the part where anybody listening who's saying, "Wow, this actually sounds like something I would want," a prospective customer. What are the immediate benefits that a customer experiences when they engage with this type of service?
So we have this perspective of an instant ROI model, executives going back to their job. That in and of itself, where somebody doesn't have to spend time in a meeting and spend time in a meeting that had a meeting afterwards,
Yep.
in order to discuss something that they don't have really great background and knowledge on. It allows them to get back to their job and stay functional in what they were doing. You know as well as I do, it takes 15 to 30 minutes before a meeting sometimes to get ready for the meeting, and then it takes 15 to 30 minutes after the meeting to get back to where your thought process was after that meeting was done.
Yep.
So a 1 hour meeting actually takes you an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes out of your day. And if that meeting really didn't have anything to do with you, or you didn't have the knowledge base to provide functional knowledge to it, all you were is the person who's signing the check at the bottom of the line, at the bottom of the quote that says, yeah, go ahead and do the job.
Mm-hmm.
You could have been much more efficient during your day by spending that hour and 45 minutes doing what you do best. So realistically, if I move an hour and 45 minutes forward in my day, instead of spending an hour and 45 minutes of wasted time, I'm like regaining 3 hours of my day.
Yep.
So I'm being much more efficient. I can do a lot more when I'm doing my job. Same thing with IT people. If IT people don't have to sit in a marketing meeting, we can continue to do IT. If we don't have to sit in a sales meeting, we can continue to do IT. So it's important that the people who are doing their job continue to do their job. It's important to have somebody to do the job that needs to be done, and that's where we come in to help manage that IT function. So every step along the way, we return that investment instantly by keeping people, employees, and executives doing the job that they need to do while we help make those IT decisions for them. So the long-term IT discovery process and meetings no longer happen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take 6 to 9 months or 12 months to solve a problem, to get a solution put in. We can make those decisions. We usually know the decision that needed to be made prior to the MSP presenting their solution. And in most cases, we're telling them what they need to quote. We're telling them the type of solution that they need to be putting into the network. So it's not like we have a new discovery that needs to be presented. We walk around the network and notice that device over there is critical and doesn't have battery backup on it. This device over here is not being backed up and there's no business continuity solution for it. So we understand what needs to be brought into that network. And so there's instant ROI in that process because we're keeping the business continuity running, especially when it's most critical.
Right.
That helps us close that time to the quote, from the quote getting into the company to the product being ordered and moving to implementation. We reduce that right down almost to nothing. And we've had a project, we had a construction project we started on in like January, and we actually didn't get signed quotes until November, but it had to be done by March.
Wow.
It takes a lot of extra hours once the signature is there to review everything that needs to happen and start ordering processes and get product in. Christmas is coming, all that time is going through, everything creates those delays. If we would have been part of that process from the beginning, or if there would have been an IT executive in the organization that didn't have to evaluate our quote versus somebody else's quote versus somebody else's quote, that ultimately came back to us and we were the most expensive solution, but we were the most thorough solution, they would have saved all of those hours and all of those months and all of the excess that it cost them, because now we were short on the gun and we couldn't get our job done as efficiently. We had to pay overtime to people to get it done. And so it actually cost more to do the job than it would have had we been able to start in January. So a lot of those things are helped by having somebody who knows how to make that decision, who's in the best interest of the client.
Right.
They get accuracy because we know how to examine it. They have competence that what they got for is what they paid for from that managed service provider. The managed service provider gets validity. I did my job and your executive told me I did it well.
Right.
So that gives them validity in what they do. And we're part of that future planning and budgeting process. All of these things build on that instant ROI. No more meetings about meetings after the IST or MSP leaves the business, or the IT MSP leaves the business,
right.
and goes off and leaves you with a quote. They deliver that quote, you no longer have to have a meeting about a meeting. And that's a huge thing. Executives are all back to work instead of managing IT.
Absolutely, saving a lot of time. So ultimately, though, who is the right client for Wentworth Consulting Group?
First and foremost, any company who wants technology and business process managed correctly. Number one piece. If you understand that technology runs your business, you could be my client. You're more than likely my best prospect. That normally runs in companies between 100 and 2,500 employees. So when I say that, companies that are 2,500 employees or more usually employ a chief technical officer in their business or a chief information officer in their business to help them manage. It's hard to get around the technology function when you have that so many of those people in your business. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is an information security officer or a business process modeler or bundled in all four of those positions, but they usually have somebody in place that's responsible for making those decisions, that has some kind of a basis for understanding the quote before it gets in the door. So most commonly, it's the company that's between 100 and 200 and 2,500 employees. Now, that doesn't mean that your company with 10 employees couldn't be a client. But it's just very common for a budgetary perspective that companies with 100 and above would be that most common space. But we are client size agnostic. We will help manage the IT infrastructure for anyone who understands that technology runs their business.
That's good to know. That's good to know. So if I'm an MSP on, listening to this, does Wentworth Consulting Group compete against the MSP industry?
Not at all. Actually, just the opposite. So the validity that we provide is a critical piece to the MSP's success in getting their job done efficiently. MSPs usually initially see us when we talk about this relationship. They can perceive us as a threat to their client relationship. But the only time that would happen is if they're not doing their job correctly. And we've walked into clients that in the past that the previous MSP that was in there was charging them for all of these services that just were not being provided. That happens.
Mm-hmm.
But who at the client side can identify that that's not really happening without having a third-party company come in and give them an assessment? You don't need the time wasted having these assessments done all the time. Realistically, if you have an executive in your organization that manages IT, that understands all of the parts that it takes to manage an IT infrastructure, doing those assessments internally, running those tests internally, and evaluating the reports and summaries that are coming from the MSP on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis, to prove that these functions are being done. And you understand and don't just, oh, hey, look at all this stuff. The CFO gets this report and they're like, look at all these things my MSP did for me. I don't understand. Well, let me put that over here. If you understand what you're supposed to be looking at and how it compares to last month and how it compares to the future months, you understand what needs to happen, what has happened, what hasn't happened, and you can identify that the tickets that were done during the month actually solved the problems that had arisen in previous months. So you have somebody who's knowledgeable to evaluate and assess these reports, and we do that as part of the management process. So all of this creates faster, more spontaneous type of decision-making process for that MSP to do their job effectively. They no longer have to explain what they do. It reduces that discussion that the VCIO at the MSP has with the client. Because usually that discussion with us can happen in 15 minutes. Whereas normally those meetings with a larger client can take an hour and a half to 2 hours sometimes to get through all the details. We don't need all that mess. We can just handle it. We understand what the reports look like, what they're supposed to look like. We can identify the problems in those and address them with the MSP usually throughout the month. And these VCIO meetings are short, quick, and easy. So it's definitely a benefit to the MSP because we validate and improve their efficiency. Time to close is cut dramatically on anything that they need to present.
So I mean, ultimately, it's a three-way win. It sounds like.
It is. The client receives instant ROI, the MSP receives validation, and the client's IT infrastructure runs and grows like it was meant to.
That's awesome. So if somebody was listening and they're wanting to engage with you, what's the easiest way to reach out?
So secondintellect.com, and I get my finger where it's supposed to be. Secondintellect.com is our domain. And you can reach that domain on the main page. There is an option for you to engage with us or learn more right in that top image. There's also a contact us page. There's several places on the site that you can fill in information and request us. You can also dial us directly and give us a call at the number that's listed behind me, 254-265-6132. And we'll engage with you, come down and have a sit-down meeting, talk about what our services are. The website's pretty informative. One of the things that I like most about what we put into our website is our education piece. Because if you really want to know what an MSP is, or you really want to understand what the dark web does, we have pieces inside of the website that help you to get that information quickly. We've actually borrowed information and integrated information right from ID Agent, because who speaks about the dark web better than ID Agent does? People who live in it all the time.
Yep.
So if you really want to understand the difference between the surface web and the deep web and the dark web, education is part of our website as well. We are also a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. I spent 9 years in the Army, beat my body up pretty bad. I'm the youngest member of the largest military family in the history of the United States.
Wow.
8 of my brothers and sisters and myself, my dad, we're all in the military. Numerous nephews and nieces have all been military. So military is a huge part of our background. So inside of our education page, we have a veterans resources function to help veterans who want to get involved in small business also gain some information on how to get that done.
Wow.
So it's just another key part that I've carried even from Fusion IT. We were a more than 50% veteran employed business, prior active duty veteran employed business.
Thank you to your entire family for your their service. Wow, that's crazy. In terms of the engagement, is this a short-term engagement, or is it something longer?
IT is a long-term engagement. So you don't put in IT today and let it set. It's not a set it and forget it kind of a product. So once it's put in place, it needs somebody who understands how to manage it and make sure that it's getting taken care of. Now, your MSP takes care of day-to-day functional operation of your IT, monitoring and management, backup, continuity. All of that is done by your managed service provider. But the management of that function needs to happen when it needs to happen. And it's all throughout the month. It's just not every day of the month. But we see ourselves as a long-term part of the team. There's more time initially necessary in order to get things like your business process model in place, ensure that it matches up with your application process model, and that worker processes are put in place. And if we need to bring in a business process modeling team to design one, we know how to manage that team in order to make sure that those functions are being done correctly.
Yep.
There's frequent communication with your managed service provider. But like I said, it's not needed on a day-to-day basis. It's needed when it's needed. The MSP is day-to-day. So we are a long-term part of the team because we fulfill that executive role, just usually that executive role that currently doesn't have somebody knowledgeable in its place, somebody who's educated in its space to do that on a day-to-day basis.
Got it. Well, Kyle, we certainly appreciate your time and welcome back to the MSP industry in terms of being connected into the channel again. We're excited to have you.
Matt, thank you very much for your time today. Greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And taking the time out of your day to help educate the public about the new service that we're offering.
Absolutely. All right, Kyle, thank you so much.